Hey, my friend.
Hello, Shane.
Thank you. Well, welcome back. You are watching the Faith and Reason show with Shane Kapler and Kevin Vost. Got to tell you, I've been enjoying my winter break from school. Been binge watching one of my favorite series called Fringe, aired on the Fox network. One of my favorite sci-fi series in the last 10 years, because not only is it about the love between a father and a son, but it's constantly looking at issues of science and faith and the incompatibility or compatibility of both of those. And Kevin, it reminded me, you shared with me once about a sci-fi story involving St. Thomas Aquinas that you had read. Would you mind talking with the audience about that a little bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to, because I'm kind of a fan of sci-fi myself, from Star Trek, to so many other series there. And I do recall that years ago, I read a story that was written actually in 1951, where St. Thomas Aquinas was basically the hero of a science fiction story. It was a story that was rated like one of the top 25 sci-fi stories of the century at the time that this anthology came out in the 1970s. And it really meant a lot to me, because St. Thomas is that person who helped draw me back to the church after some reading other philosophers had pulled me away for 25 years. But basically, here's how this story goes. It's called The Quest for Saint Aquinas by Anthony Boucher. Mm-hmm. And as the story starts, it's kind of like many of our modern sci-fi stories. It's a kind of a post-apocalyptic world in terms of a post-nuclear war, like some of the Terminator movies and things like that. Yeah. So you're starting there. The world is now run by these technocrats, they're called. And one of the things in their wisdom that they've outlawed is religion. Now, as we know from Scripture, the Catholic Church will survive. The gates of hell won't prevail against it. So the Catholic Church is still here, but it's had to go underground. In this story, even the Pope has to conceal his ring in a compartment in his shoe. People just have symbols they use. They pray the rosary by the number of beads on the buttons on their shirts and so on. So it's very secretive and underground. Mm-hmm. But the way the story goes, the Pope is told the rumors of this saint whose body lies incorrupt up in this mountain. And they said this was a man who was able to draw people into the faith. He was a great proselytizer, a great person evangelizer, who drew people in. So the Pope wanted to find out if this story was true, if this incorruptible saint is really there. So he calls forth one of his associates, Father Thomas, mm-hmm. and asks him to go investigate. And he sends him out on this robotic donkey. And as the story goes, the roads were so terrible at that time, they couldn't just have wheeled vehicles. They had to have vehicles that had legs like an animal.
Okay, kind of like an AT-AT in Star Wars.
Okay, exactly. This robotic donkey that had the legs, but it also had wheels when things got smooth for a stretch. So anyway, Father Thomas heads out to find this saint, Saint Aquinas, who lying incorrupt perhaps in the mountains. And at one point on their journey, this robotic donkey also talks. It's been programmed to have intelligence. And it informs Father Thomas that it's been programmed with perfect intelligence. And because of that, perfect intelligence, perfect reason, it informed him they can't believe in God. Mm-hmm. So Father just wasn't sure what to make of that. They continue on their journey, though. The donkey does take him to the cave. They do find the body laying there. As Father Thomas looks on the body of this saint, though, the robotic donkey goes up and with it sort of smashes some of the skin on the saint's wrist area. And what it exposes is metal and wires.
Wow.
So the story ends up that this so-called incorrupt saint was actually a robot. And upon seeing this, the robotic donkey says to Father Thomas, well, you better tell the Pope that you found your incorrupt saint, because your job is to draw people to the faith, and that's what incorrupt saints do. Well, Father immediately had a big insight here and said to the robotic donkey, he said, no, faith cannot be based on a lie. It has to be based on fact. He says, and now this makes sense to me. He says, there were stories told of a human robot that was made with near-perfect intelligence and did have amazing reasoning capacities. He said, it makes sense that the name was Aquinas. He says, because we've heard of stories of a Thomas of Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas. Right. The church's most perfect reasoner, Father says. He says, well, his writings have been lost, he said, but maybe we can find them. Maybe we can build on them. He said, because this is an age that has rejected faith. Mm-hmm. People respond only to reason, and Thomas was that perfect reasoner, and through his reason, he drew people to the faith. So as the story went, this was the robot program with perfect reason, and its own reason led it to the fact that it didn't make itself. Man made this robot, but it also knew that man couldn't make himself either. It reasoned its way back to the necessary existence of the Almighty Creator, God the Father and the Creator of the universe, and also led him then to the truth through a series of logical deductions to the truth of the Catholic faith. So this, even though a robot, as the story goes, its mission then became to spread the word of the faith. So kind of a fascinating little story there. But when I think about that, I think, well, it's a beautiful story, but thank God, the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas have not been lost.
Yeah.
They are definitely still there with us. They are incredibly voluminous. His major work is called the Summa Theologica, and I've pulled from it in many of my books. The book, The 1 Minute Aquinas, is kind of a brief 300-page or so summary of this book, which is itself 3,000 to 4,000 pages, 1.5 million words. If I can show readers, I'll show
Please
them
do.
1/8 of the Latin-English edition. This is one of 8 volumes that makes up the Latin-English edition of that Summa Theologica. I know its shipping weight is 32.2 pounds. So I have found Thomas, an inexhaustible source of wisdom for us. And again, it was just a little special treat when I recalled that he had actually been the hero of a science fiction story.
It had been a while since you told me about that, and as you were just talking about it, what really struck me was the way, in the story, reason is still prized. And I'll tell you, when I open up a paper, when I turn on the news, anytime I hear people discussing serious topics today, from our economy to immigration to abortion, reason doesn't even seem to be prized anymore. Or if it is, it's in very short supply. Now, Thomas Aquinas, not just a man of faith, as you were saying, but of reason and faith. So how can St. Thomas help people today? I mean, just to reason properly, how to think.
Yeah, he gives us great lessons there. I think if I'm watching television, the political commentary shows, of a person from the left, a person from the right on in the split screen with the host, right? And basically the left person is giving a series of left bullet points. The right person is giving a series of right bullet points. They may talk completely past each other because the premise is not that let's reason together and find the truth. It's let me present my side, let me present yours. And they often then will distort their opponent's side. It's called setting up a straw man. Maybe attributing them ideas to them they don't really have, or quoting them out of context, all these types of things. We see it all the time, and it's sad. But Thomas gives us almost a perfect example of the exact opposite. In that Summa Theologica, he covers thousands of different topics, and some of them were controversial matters of philosophy and theology, even things on the nature of man, how our emotions work, our feelings, how we think, and all this. But whatever the topic is, he starts with what he calls a series of objections. And these are conclusions that are counter to his own conclusions. But he presents them totally fairly and clearly. They might be buttressed to some extent with passages from Scripture, or certain church fathers, or certain philosophers. And Thomas accurately lays these positions out. Some have said even better than the people who actually argued them. So he respectfully shows what they truly believe before he provides his own answer. He says, I answer that. He gives his personal conclusions on these topics. Then he goes by one and he replies to each one of these objections, showing, I've heard what you had to say, and here's exactly what I think may be lacking in it. And it may not be you're flat out wrong. It's only if you look at it in this particular sense, or maybe you had only a portion of the truth. Here's the truth that you left out. So I think it's a magnificent lesson to us, the way Thomas reasons, the way he is very careful to understand what a person who thinks differently thinks before he sets out to try to attack it.
Gosh, that sounds like exactly what we need, not just on television and in magazines, but in our families, to be able to discuss things in a reasonable way and come to a conclusion together.
Yeah, exactly. And I should paraphrase too, when I say attack it, never attack the person. He's teaching the truth. He's only trying to attack error. So I think Thomas can be a wonderful lesson to us, and hopefully as our episodes go by, because he's an almost inexhaustible source, we'll come back to him time and time again.
Well, let me ask, because I know your writings, you're coming out with book 21 soon, and St. Thomas plays a large part in a number of them. Where would you tell people to start looking at St. Thomas's arguments? What would be a good introduction if they wanted to look at your works?
For my works, it would be the book, The 1 Minute Aquinas. because this is the summary, the kind of bottom line of his Summa Theologica. There's not a whole lot of the objections and all, but what did Thomas actually teach about a whole host of questions relating to God, to the human person, and also to Christ in particular in the Catholic Church. So that would be the book, The 1 Minute Aquinas. Others are somewhat more specialized, like How to Think Like Aquinas. If you want to learn how to be a better student, to better be able to grasp truths, to better be able to reason yourself, then that's the book to go there. But thanks for asking.
Oh, most welcome.